All right, buckle up, everybody, because today we're diving into a seriously creepy case.
Yeah, this one's a doozy.
The story of Lonnie David Franklin Jr.
The Grim Sleeper.
The Grim Sleeper, right.
Yeah,
We've got a ton of material here.
the goo.
Court records, news
The
articles.
whole 9 yards.
And we're going to really dig into not just his crimes,
Right.
but like the whole world around it all.
Exactly.
You know, the society, how they caught him, all that.
It's a long story.
Yeah.
And it really shows how DNA and forensics have changed how they solve these cases.
Oh, yeah, totally. But it's also,
It's not just about catching a killer, though.
right, it's about like the victims.
The victims, the community,
The community's fight for justice.
the missed chances.
So many missed chances.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Where do we even begin?
let's start at the beginning, right? Franklin's early life. It gets dark kind of right off the bat.
Oh, yeah?
Dishonorable discharge from the army.
Wow.
And the reason? A gang rape
Whoa.
in Germany.
Already, yikes.
I know, right?
And what's crazy is even back then, he was taking pictures of his victims.
Oh, yeah.
Like this weird, messed up thing he kept doing.
So disturbing, like a glimpse of what was to come.
Yeah, exactly.
Then you look at his record, right?
Yeah.
Theft, assault, battery.
It keeps getting worse.
Like this horrifying ramp up to something truly awful.
It's like watching a train wreck in slow motion, you know?
Totally.
And then we hit the mid-'80s in L.A.
Oh, boy.
A serial killer is on the loose, the Southside Slayer, they call them.
Targeting Black women.
Mostly sex workers, drug users.
Right, and this is where the whole societal context just explodes, right?
It's huge.
There's outrage because a lot of folks felt the LAPD just didn't care as much.
Definitely not the same urgency.
Yeah, like if it had been happening in, Beverly Hills or something.
Exactly.
Right.
Margaret Prescott and her group were, like, leading the charge for justice.
Yeah, they were really out there criticizing the LAPD.
They were saying, look, you're not putting in the resources.
Yeah.
You're not giving us the attention it deserves.
Such a clear example of how bias, even if they don't realize it,
Oh, yeah.
it affects everything.
Totally skews the investigation.
But here's where it gets even crazier. It wasn't just one killer
Right.
in South Central at that time.
Multiple serial killers.
What?
Active at the same time.
Are you serious?
Dead serious.
That's insane.
Louis Crane, Michael Hughes, Daniel Lee Siebert,
Oh my God.
Chester Turner, Ivan Hill,
So many names.
all convicted of murders they originally thought were the Southside Slayers.
Wait, so multiple serial killers all at once?
Chaos. Pure chaos.
It was like a horror movie or something.
And to make things even more complicated, some of the murders, they were never solved.
Oh, God.
Maybe not even connected to any serial killer. Who knows?
Just random awful violence on top of everything else.
Yeah, real mess.
Didn't they even arrest the wrong guy at one point?
Yeah.
Completely wrong.
Detective Ricky Ross,
Oh, yeah.
charged with, I think it was 3 murders.
And later they were like, oops, sorry, not him.
Basically, independent forensics cleared him.
Unbelievable.
And sadly, those 3 murders, they're still unsolved.
It's heartbreaking.
It is.
So with all this craziness going on, how do they even start to figure out which killings are actually Franklin's?
Well, ballistics was the key.
Okay.
They noticed a pattern, a cluster of murders, all linked by a .25 caliber gun.
Ah, so that's how they started to separate things out.
Yeah, and the first confirmed victim in that cluster was Deborah Jackson,
Deborah Jackson.
murdered in 1985.
And then silence, right?
That's where the name Grim Sleeper comes from.
Right.
After Deborah Jackson, 14 years.
14 years.
Before the next confirmed victim.
That's chillin'.
In 2002, what was he doing all that time?
Was he in jail for something else?
Maybe laying low.
It's like a ghost story almost.
It really is. A question that's always hung over this case.
And then in the early 2000s, things start to change because of DNA, right?
DNA technology is really advancing.
It's 2007. Janisha Peters is murdered.
That's the turning point.
Right.
Her case gives them the DNA to finally link 11 unsolved murders.
11.
All the way back to 1985.
Wow.
And here's the clincher. Each one also involved that same .25 caliber gun.
So it all starts coming together.
Exactly.
It must have been huge for the investigator.
Massive relief. They finally had something concrete.
Right.
They formed a task force, the 800 Task Force.
Dedicated to catching the Grim Sleeper.
Exactly. They have the science on their side now.
But there's always a but, isn't there?
There is. Remember, this is the Grim Sleeper.
Right. I read something about how they were doing things kind of secretly.
Yeah, the task force, they started out super hush-hush.
Which is kind of weird, right?
Raised some eyebrows, People worried about transparency, public safety.
Yeah, I mean, this guy's out there potentially still killing.
Right. And then a journalist, Christine Pilasek, she breaks the story
Oh, yeah.
about the task force, the DNA link, the whole thing.
So it all came out anyway.
It did. And people start wondering, was the LAPD trying to avoid the spotlight?
Right, like that pressure they had during the Southside Slayer days.
Exactly. They didn't want a repeat of that.
And then you have Anitra Washington,
Anitra Washington.
the only one who survived.
Yeah.
Her story is just terrifying.
Harrows your soul.
But it also gives us so much insight.
Invaluable insight into how he operated.
Right, like his MO.
Yeah. She gave a detailed description of him, his vehicle.
Crucial stuff.
Absolutely.
But here's the thing that just blows my mind.
What's that?
They could have had his DNA way earlier.
Oh, yeah.
Like years earlier.
Yeah.
He had a felony conviction in 2003.
Right.
But get this, because of a backlog, they didn't collect his DNA.
Oh, no.
It wasn't until after Proposition 69.
Expanding the DNA database.
Right, which was in 2004.
So, potentially, more lives could have been saved.
It's a thought that just haunts me.
It's a dark what if.
Yeah. A reminder that even with the best tech, things can still go so wrong.
For sure. Those delays, those backlogs.
They have consequences.
Massive consequences.
But in the end, it was the DNA database and this new thing, familial DNA analysis,
yeah,
that really cracked the case wide open.
a total game changer.
Right.
They didn't find an exact match to the crime scene DNA, but they found something almost as good.
Okay. What's almost as good?
A partial match.
Partial. What does that even mean?
Like a close relative.
Okay.
So similar, it had to be family. It was really close.
Wow.
So they start looking at relatives of people in the database.
Makes sense.
Right, and that's how they found
Christopher.
Franklin's son.
Oh, wow.
He had a felony conviction. His DNA was in there.
Because of the database expansion.
Right.
Crazy how it all connects.
It's like a puzzle. All the pieces finally clicking into place.
So they knew they had to look at Christopher's father.
Lonnie Franklin Jr.
But they needed to be sure, right?
Of course, they needed that irrefutable proof.
Did they just show up at his door?
Nope. This is where the undercover operation comes in.
The pizza crust, right. I read about that.
That's the one. Pretty clever, actually.
Tell me about it.
Undercover officer posing as a busboy.
At a restaurant Franklin went to.
Right.
And he got the pizza crust.
Yep. Discarded pizza crust.
And that was it.
Bingo. DNA match. They had their man.
Finally. After all these years.
July 2010, they arrest him.
What a moment that must have been.
Huge. Years of work, finally paying off.
But then they search his house.
And that's where the real horror show begins.
The photos.
The photos. Over 1,000 of them.
Ugh, I get chills just thinking about it.
Hundreds of hours of video, too.
And most of them.
Black women.
Some awake, some not.
It was a nightmare scenario.
So many potential victims.
It's a thought that just keeps you up at night.
Women who never even got reported missing.
Or their disappearance is never connected to the grim sleeper.
So they had to do something.
If they had to. They decided to release the photos.
Publicly.
Yeah.
Wow.
It was a tough call, but they had to try.
To identify these women.
Maybe bring closure to more families.
That's a whole other level of tragedy.
It really is.
Yeah.
The ripple effects of this case are just...
unfathomable.
Yeah. It was a long shot. But they had to do something. And remember that 14-year gap?
Yeah, the sleeper part.
Right. Well, investigators start looking closer at that time period.
Oh, no. So even more potential victims.
I'm afraid so. At least 6 more women. Their cases just screamed grim sleeper.
6 more on top of.
The 10 confirmed, yeah.
So 16 or more victims, that's just beyond words. What about those women from the gap years?
2 of them, Inez Warren and Georgia Mae Thomas, they were never found.
Oh, God. Just awful. Their families never knowing.
It's heartbreaking.
So with all this new stuff coming out, the photos, the potential new victims, did the case finally go to trial?
It did. But it took a while.
Oh. What happened?
Delays. Lots of delays.
Legal stuff.
Yeah, pre-trial stuff. Very complex. Lots of postponements.
I can only imagine how hard that must have been for the families.
To wait so long.
For justice.
Yeah.
While still grieving.
Absolutely. It was brutal for everyone involved.
It's just dragging things out.
Yeah, the pain and the not knowing. But finally, in February 2016,
years later,
the trial began.
Well, what was it like being in the courtroom?
Heavy. You could just feel the weight of it all.
Yeah, it makes sense.
The witnesses, the families, reporters, everyone knew what this case was about.
And the crimes.
The sheer horror of it.
So how did the prosecution approach the case?
Very methodically. They had to connect all the dots.
What was their main evidence?
Ballistics, of course.
Yeah.
The .25 caliber gun, and then the DNA.
That familial match was huge.
Oh, yeah, that was a cornerstone of their case.
And Anitra Washington's testimony.
Powerful. To hear from someone who'd looked Franklin in the eye.
And lived to tell the tale.
Right. She described the attack, the terror, how she played dead to survive.
Wow. I bet the jury was just riveted.
Totally. They were hanging on her every word. That, plus the forensic evidence. It was looking good for Franklin.
What about the defense? Did they claim he was innocent?
His lawyers tried. They poked holes in some of the evidence.
Like what?
Tried to offer alternative explanations for things.
Interesting. But it didn't work.
Not really. The prosecution's case was just too strong.
Too much evidence.
Mountains of it.
So after all that, what happened? What was the verdict?
The jury took a day and a half.
A day and a half? That's not that long.
Nope. And they came back with a guilty verdict.
On all counts.
Every single one. 10 counts of murder, 1 count of attempted murder.
Wow. Finally, some justice.
Yeah. For the families, it was a victory. A long time coming.
But even then, the story's not over.
Not quite. The prosecution had one more move.
What do you mean?
They wanted to make sure Franklin answered for everything.
But he was already found guilty.
Right, but remember those additional victims. They presented evidence on 4 more women.
The ones they suspected he killed during those 14 years.
Exactly. They couldn't officially charge him. Not enough DNA evidence.
So what could they do?
They used it as an aggravating factor to make sure his sentence was as severe as possible. They focused on Sharon, Alicia Dismuke, Inez Warren, Georgia Mae Thomas.
And what about Relenia Morris?
Relenia Morris. They never found her body.
But they found her driver's license at Franklin's house.
Yeah, and photos of her. It was pretty damning.
Ugh, chilling, so many lives lost.
They also talked about Iella Marshall. Her school ID was in his garage.
But they couldn't charge him for her case.
Not enough evidence. But still, the impact of Franklin's crimes.
Immeasurable. So much pain. So many families destroyed.
It's hard to even wrap your head around it.
What was the final sentence?
The jury didn't hesitate. They recommended death.
Death penalty.
Yeah. In August 2016, the court made it official. Death for each of the 10 murders.
Wow. After such a long fight, it was over.
For the families, it must have been a bittersweet victory.
Justice, but also the pain never really goes away.
Never. But then, the story takes another turn.
Another one.
Franklin was sent to San Quentin, death row. But in March 2020,
Wow.
he was found dead in his cell.
Dead.
Cardiac arrest. They said it was natural causes.
So he never faced execution.
Nope, it just ended.
Wow. That must have been hard for the families, not getting that finality.
It's complicated, right?
Yeah.
Some might have felt relief
Yeah.
that he was finally gone.
No more threats, right.
Others might have wanted to see him face the consequences.
It's like a whole other layer of injustice almost.
In a way, yeah.
Yeah.
But it also highlights something important. This case is not just about Lonnie Franklin Jr.
What do you mean?
It's about the victims, the lives he took, the families he shattered, the community he terrorized.
It's a tough reminder, that even when they catch the guy, the damage is done.
Oh, absolutely. It goes so much deeper than just one guy.
Way beyond Franklin himself.
This case forces us to look at, the bigger picture. The ugly parts of society we don't want to talk about.
Right, the systemic issues. Would the police have even cared this much?
Makes you wonder, Ray.
If the victims hadn't been, Black women.
From poor neighborhoods.
Exactly. Would it have been such a big deal in the media?
Probably not. It's a sad truth, but we got to face it.
It's like some victims matter more than others.
And that bias, conscious or not, it affects everything.
The investigation, the resources, how seriously they take it.
All of it. And in the Grim Sleeper case, that bias probably played a role.
And how long it took to catch him.
Ugh, it's sickening to think about.
We have to acknowledge this stuff, actively fight against it.
Otherwise, it just keeps happening.
For every grim sleeper they catch, there are probably tons more.
Out there right now, preying on the vulnerable, slipping through the cracks.
It's terrifying. We got to stay vigilant.
Support the people fighting for justice.
Hold the system accountable.
Exactly. We can't just sit around and wait for things to change.
We have to be the change.
Right. As we wrap this up, it's so important to remember those women.
The ones whose lives were stolen.
Their stories need to be heard.
Their memories deserve to be kept alive.
Deborah Jackson, Henrietta Wright, Barbara Ware.
Bernita Sparks, Mary Lowe, Lucretia Jefferson,
Inez Warren, Monique Alexander, Princess Berthomieu.
Valerie McCorvey, Janisha Peters, and all the ones we don't even know.
They were mothers, daughters, sisters, friends. They had lives, dreams.
And Franklin took it all away.
He did. We can't bring them back, but we can fight for a better world.
A world where this doesn't happen, where everyone is safe, where everyone gets justice.
That's the goal. This case, it shows us the darkest parts of humanity.
But it also shows how strong people can be, fighting for what's right.
Standing up to power, never giving up.
It's been heavy, this conversation.
Important, but heavy.
I hope everyone listening learned something.
Started thinking about these things a little differently.
Keep asking questions. Keep fighting for a better world.
Never forget the victims. Their lives mattered, and their stories have to be told.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll be back soon with another topic that needs a closer look. Until then, keep learning, keep pushing for change, and take care of each other.